In the annals of Chinese history, the rise of the Ming Dynasty stands as one of the most transformative and tumultuous periods. The empire, born from the fires of rebellion and the ashes of the Yuan dynasty, found its strength not only in the might of its armies but also in the wisdom and fortitude of a woman, Empress Ma. Her name may not be as widely known as that of other figures of history, yet her influence on the founding of the Ming Empire was undeniable, shaping its future in ways that would echo through the corridors of power for generations. Born into the early years of the 14th century, Ma, as she was known before ascending to the throne, was not destined to be an empress. Her humble origins, far from the imperial court, were marked by simplicity and the quiet dignity of a woman who, though born into a world of turbulence, would rise to stand beside one of the most important figures in Chinese history, Zhu Yuanzhang, the future Emperor Hangu, who would go on to found the Ming Dynasty. The story of Empress Ma is not just one of palace intrigue and political power, though there was certainly much of that. It is also a tale of loyalty, love, and sacrifice. It is a story of a woman who stood steadfast in the face of immense challenges, who navigated the treacherous waters of the imperial court, and who helped steer the destiny of an empire through its most fragile early years. Zhu Yuanzhang, a man who had once been a poor peasant and later a rebel leader, saw in Empress Ma more than a consort. He saw an equal, someone whose wisdom and guidance were as essential to his reign as his own military prowess. Together, they would face enemies both external and internal. Their bond would become the backbone of the nascent Ming Empire, tested by rebellion, assassination attempts, and the ever-looming threat of betrayal within their own court. But this is not just the story of Zhu Yuanzhang and his rise to power. It is the story of Empress Ma's own journey, a woman of intelligence, determination, and an unwavering sense of duty. Her role in the court was not merely ceremonial, for she wielded influence over both the emperor and the empire, guiding policies that would shape the very foundation of Chinese governance for centuries to come. Yet, as with all powerful figures, Empress Ma's life was not free of conflict or tragedy. Behind her composed exterior, she bore the weight of personal loss, political maneuvering, and the harsh realities of a life at the top of the social ladder. Her strength, however, was not only in her ability to survive, but in her ability to maintain her sense of self amidst the chaos. The story of Empress Ma is one that intertwines with that of Zhu Yuanzhang's, as well as with other figures like Li Xiaochun, whose loyalty and dedication would further complicate the shifting dynamics of the imperial court. Together, these figures would form a tapestry of intrigue, power, and ambition, where every decision held the potential to reshape the future of a dynasty still in its infancy. As the empire stands on the edge of greatness, the stakes for Empress Ma could not be higher. The path ahead would demand more than just royal authority. It would demand courage, vision, and above all, an unshakable will to protect those she loved and the empire she helped to build. In the coming chapters, we will follow Empress Ma through the early years of her marriage to Zhu Yuanzhang, her ascent to the throne, and the immense challenges she faced as a woman in a man's world of power and politics. From the early battles for survival to the eventual consolidation of power, Empress Ma's journey will reveal the quiet strength that held the Ming Dynasty together in its most fragile moments. Her story is not just one of royal duty. It is a tale of a woman who defied the expectations of her time, and whose actions left an indelible mark on the course of Chinese history. In the early years of the 14th century, China was a land in turmoil. The Yuan dynasty, established by the Mongols, had long outstayed its welcome. The people, weary of Mongol rule, found hope in the rising figure of Zhu Yuanzhang, a former beggar turned leader of a rebel army. But long before Zhu's rise to power, in a humble village far from the grandeur of the imperial capital, a young girl named Ma was quietly growing into a woman who would one day shape the fate of an entire empire. Ma was born to a family of modest means in a small village in the province of Anhui. Her father, a scholar by training but a farmer by necessity, believed deeply in the importance of education. He taught her the classics, the art of calligraphy, and the intricacies of Chinese poetry, skills that would set her apart in a world where women were often seen as little more than pawns in the game of politics. Despite her beauty, Ma She's true gifts lay in her intellect and her ability to listen, qualities that would serve her well in the years to come. Her mother, a gentle but strong woman, was the cornerstone of their household. Though she did not share her husband's passion for learning, she instilled in Ma She a sense of duty and discipline. A woman's strength lies not in her voice, her mother would often say, but in her heart and the quiet power she wields in silence. Growing up, Ma She was not a stranger to hardship. Her father's modest income could barely support the family, and when she was only 12, a devastating drought struck their village. Crops failed, and many families were forced to leave in search of better prospects. But Ma She's father refused to leave his land. He believed that by staying, he could protect what little they had left. It was during this time of hardship that Ma She first understood the weight of loyalty, both to one's family and to one's country. As she grew older, Ma She's reputation spread beyond her village. Her intelligence, grace, and quiet determination caught the eye of local scholars and officials. But it was not until a chance meeting with a high-ranking official from the capital that her fate would truly change. The official, a friend of her father's, had come to Anhui on a government assignment and was struck by the young woman's wisdom. He spoke highly of her to his superiors in the imperial court, and it wasn't long before an offer was made for her to serve as a lady-in-waiting at the palace. But Ma She had no desire to leave her family behind. She had grown up with the belief that family came first and that loyalty to her roots was more important than ambition or fortune. However, her parents, recognizing the opportunity, insisted that she accept the offer. They saw in it not just a chance for Ma She to improve her own life, but a way for the family to rise above their poverty and gain influence in the ever-changing landscape of the court. It was with a heavy heart that Ma She left her home. But as she journeyed to the capital, she could not have known that this would be the beginning of a journey that would see her rise to the highest echelons of power in the land. Standing beside one of China's most legendary emperors, arriving at the palace, Ma She was struck by the sheer opulence and grandeur of the imperial court. The walls were adorned with priceless tapestries, and the halls were filled with the sound of bustling officials and courtiers. But beneath the surface, she sensed a tension in the air, a subtle but undeniable undercurrent of distrust. The Mongol rulers, though established in power, were increasingly seen as foreign oppressors.
The Han people,
like Ma She, longed for a return to native rule. It was in this environment of unrest that Ma She would meet the man who would change her life forever. Zhu Yuanzhang, at the time still a leader of a growing rebel force, was a figure that many in the court saw as a threat. But Ma She, ever the keen observer, saw something else in him, a determination that matched her own, a quiet resolve to see China restored to its people. Though their first meeting was brief, Ma She's sharp mind and calm demeanor caught the attention of the young rebel leader. For Zhu Yuanzhang, the encounter was more than just a passing introduction. He had heard of Ma She's intelligence and wisdom from his spies, and now, in person, he saw for himself the potential she held. He had been raised on the harsh streets, where survival meant knowing who to trust and who to fear. Ma She, in his eyes, was someone who understood the art of power without flaunting it, a trait that was rare even among men, let alone women. As the rebellion continued to gain momentum, Zhu Yuanzhang found himself more and more drawn to Ma She. She became a trusted advisor, her insights often steering his decisions in the right direction. She saw in him not just a ruler but a man who, like her, had suffered, who understood the value of loyalty and the weight of ambition. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day, not just as leader and advisor, but as partners in a vision for a new China, one free from the chains of Mongol rule. However, their relationship was not without its challenges. The court was a place of intrigue, where enemies lurked behind every corner, and trust was a rare commodity. As Zhu Yuanzhang's power grew, so too did the opposition. Many courtiers, jealous of Ma Shi's rising influence, began to whisper against her, accusing her of wielding too much power for a woman. It was during these turbulent years that Empress Ma began to emerge as more than just a consort. She became a political force in her own right, using her intellect and diplomacy to help Zhu Yuanzhang navigate the treacherous waters of the court. But as her influence grew, so did the dangers surrounding her. She was no longer just the emperor's wife. She was a symbol of his strength and vision, and for that, she had many enemies. This first part of the story sets the stage for a dramatic and ambitious tale. Empress Ma, once a humble village girl, was becoming a central figure in the fight for a new empire. But the price of power was steep, and as the journey toward the throne continued, the challenges Ma Shi faced would only become more complex and dangerous. Her strength, however, would prove to be the key to her survival and to the survival of the Ming Dynasty itself. The days after Ma Shi's arrival at the imperial palace were not as she had imagined. The grandeur and opulence that she had once dreamed of were tainted by the constant intrigue, backstabbing, and power struggles that defined the Yuan dynasty's final years. The Mongol rulers, though strong militarily, had lost their grip on the hearts of the people. The Han majority, long oppressed and yearning for their own rulers, saw Zhu Yuanzhang's rebellion as a beacon of hope. But for those within the palace, Zhu was seen as a dangerous threat, an outsider with no royal blood to claim the throne. Ma Shi had quickly learned that the palace was a battlefield in its own right, a place where alliances were fragile, and loyalty was a commodity more valuable than gold. As Zhu Yuanzhang's trusted advisor, she understood the stakes more clearly than most. Her role, though not officially recognized, was becoming more influential. The emperor's increasing reliance on her sharp mind and careful diplomacy was not lost on the court. She had become a shadow ruler in many ways, working behind the scenes to guide Zhu's decisions as he fought to consolidate his power. But as Zhu Yuanzhang's forces grew stronger, so did the opposition within the palace. Empress Ma was becoming a target. There were whispers behind closed doors, questions about her growing influence, and suspicions that she was using her position to control the emperor from behind the throne. Some of the courtiers, particularly those loyal to the Mongol regime, feared that Ma Shi was becoming too powerful and that her ambition might one day surpass that of her husband. Zhu Yuanzhang, while still the leader of the rebel forces, had to navigate a complex political landscape. The struggle for control over China was as much about military conquest as it was about securing support from the elites within the court. Empress Ma was crucial to this process. Her ability to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics, to silence her enemies with subtlety rather than force, made her a key asset. It was not uncommon for the emperor to turn to her for advice on matters of strategy, governance, and even diplomacy. She was more than a consort. She was the emperor's closest confidant. But the road to power was never smooth, and Empress Ma knew better than anyone that the palace was a place where loyalty could turn to treachery in an instant. One of the emperor's most trusted generals, Li Xiaochun, a man whose loyalty had never been questioned, began to show signs of discontent. Ma Shi had always trusted Li, but his actions in the coming years would cast a long shadow over her life. Li Xiaochun had been a soldier long before he had ever entered the imperial court. He had fought alongside Zhu Yuanzhang for years, earning the emperor's trust and respect. But as the emperor's power grew, so did the complexities of his relationship with his most trusted generals. Li Xiaochun had never been a man of subtlety. His loyalty was unquestioned, but it was a loyalty that was as much about duty as it was about his own ambitions. As the years passed, Li began to grow restless. He was a man of action, and the slow, calculated rise of the emperor, with Ma Shi by his side, frustrated him. He believed that Zhu Yuanzhang's vision was too slow, too cautious. Li's own vision was more immediate, He sought to secure his place in the new order, and that required a change in leadership. First, Ma Shi had dismissed Li's increasing complaints, but over time, it became clear that the general's discontent was more than just a passing frustration. He began to question the emperor's strategy and the role of Ma Shi in the decision-making process. It was during these moments of tension that Empress Ma realized the danger she and her husband faced. Li Xiaochun, once a loyal ally, had become a potential threat. The tension between Ma Shi and Li Xiaochun grew to a boiling point when a series of key military decisions were made by Zhu Yuanzhang. Li, feeling his influence slipping away, began to openly question the emperor's choices. Empress Ma, ever the diplomat, attempted to mediate between the two men, but her efforts were in vain. Li Xiaochun's ambitions had grown too great, and his frustrations too deep. In the midst of this conflict, the emperor's enemies outside the court began to make their move. The Yuan dynasty, though crumbling, was not yet defeated. Rebel factions within the Mongol regime began to organize, and the court itself was rife with spies and informants. Zhu Yuanzhang, despite his military genius, was not immune to the dangers of internal betrayal. Empress Ma, always vigilant, began to piece together the intricate web of conspiracies that surrounded them. It was during one such moment, when a Mongol spy was caught attempting to infiltrate their ranks, that Empress Ma's true political acumen was revealed. The emperor had long been suspicious of the Mongols within his court, but it was Ma Shi who uncovered the full extent of their plans. Her network of informants, built over years of careful observation, was vast. She understood that the greatest threat to the emperor's reign came not from the outside, but from within. It was this discovery that would lead to a pivotal moment in the Ming Dynasty's early years. The emperor, now fully aware of the extent of the threats within his own court, turned to Empress Ma for guidance. She suggested that a series of purges be carried out, targeting those who had been loyal to the Yuan and those who had shown signs of betrayal. It was a risky move, but one that was necessary if Zhu Yuanzhang was to secure his rule. The purge, however, was not without its consequences. Many of those loyal to the emperor, but who had been too close to the old regime, found themselves caught in the web of suspicion. The palace was thrown into chaos as accusations flew, and the once unified court began to fragment. But Empress Ma's careful handling of the situation ensured that the emperor's position remained secure. She had become not just an advisor, but a true partner in his rule, a figure whose wisdom and strength held the empire together during its most vulnerable moments. But even as the court began to stabilize, the forces outside the palace walls were gathering. Li Xiaochun, whose ambitions had led him to become a rival to the emperor's authority, had begun to gather his own followers. It was clear that a confrontation between the two men was inevitable. But Empress Ma, ever the strategist, knew that the true battle would not be fought on the battlefield. It would be fought in the heart of the emperor's court, where loyalty and trust were the most valuable currencies. Empress Ma had learned long ago that the struggle for power was a game of subtlety, where every word, every gesture could tip the balance of fate. With Zhu Yuanzhang's forces sweeping across the country, the remnants of the Yuan dynasty crumbled. Yet, within the walls of the imperial court, the fight for dominance was not one of military might, but of control over the emperor's mind and heart. As much as Zhu Yuanzhang trusted Empress Ma, the threats from both within and outside the court were beginning to encroach upon their fragile reign. Li Xiaochun, once a loyal general in Zhu's ranks, had risen to a level of influence that made him a rival to Empress Ma. His dissatisfaction with Zhu's decisions had festered for years, but now it was becoming more than just a nuisance. Li's ambitions had grown, and his growing discontent became an open challenge to the emperor's authority. He began to gather support from military factions, using his charisma and years of service to rally those who still held ties to the fallen Yuan dynasty. It was during this time that Ma Shi truly began to feel the weight of her position. She had been a trusted advisor, a woman of great intelligence, But she was not immune to the shifting tides of power. Despite her previous successes in handling court politics, the emperor's reliance on her was beginning to waver. The growing influence of Li Xiaochun, combined with a shifting balance of power within the imperial court, placed Empress Ma at the center of a storm she could not control. The pressure of holding Zhu Yuanzhang's empire together was taking its toll on Ma Shi. As the months passed, she found herself fighting not just for her survival, but for the survival of the dynasty itself. Her role had evolved from a supportive consort to a power broker in her own right. Zhu Yuanzhang, though ever grateful for her guidance, was consumed with the chaos of military campaigns, leaving Empress Ma to navigate the treacherous waters of court intrigue. Li Xiaochun's rise to power was no accident. He had spent years building alliances with military leaders, some of whom were still loyal to the Yuan dynasty. He knew that a divided court was a weak court, and his influence over the military gave him a strategic advantage. At the same time, he began to exploit the growing dissent among the emperor's other generals, some of whom had become disillusioned with Zhu's leadership. The political landscape had shifted, and Empress Ma found herself walking a tightrope, balancing her loyalty to her husband with her growing realization that the very man she had helped rise to power might no longer be the same person she had once loved. One of the key events that deepened the rift between Empress Ma and Zhu Yuanzhang occurred when Li Xiaochun, through a combination of cunning and manipulation, orchestrated a military campaign against a powerful faction of Mongol loyalists who had refused to accept the new order. This was a decisive moment for both sides. If Zhu Yuanzhang could defeat the Mongol remnants once and for all, his rule would be unchallenged. But Li's tactics, though effective, were brutal and ruthless. He pushed for the complete annihilation of the enemy forces, disregarding the possibility of negotiating a peaceful settlement. The emperor, torn between his generals and the woman he trusted more than anyone, found himself at a crossroads. Empress Ma, ever the pragmatist, advised against total destruction. She believed that mercy could win more hearts than violence ever could. But Li Xiaochun was not one to listen to reason. He had the emperor's ear, and he had made it clear that he would stop at nothing to secure his position in the new order. In a private meeting with the emperor, Empress Ma laid bare her fears. She reminded him of the long road they had traveled together, of the sacrifices they had made, and of the vision they had shared. "We are not like the Mongols," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "We must build an empire, not a kingdom of fear. Mercy is not weakness, it is strength." But Zhu Yuanzhang, though moved by her words, could not ignore the pressure mounting from all sides. He was a man at war, not just with external enemies but with his own court. The choice he faced was difficult. On one hand, there was Empress Ma, the woman who had been his ally and advisor. On the other, there was Li Xiaochun, whose ambition and military prowess made him an undeniable force. In the end, Zhu Yuanzhang chose the path of aggression, sending Li's forces to crush the Mongol resistance. The aftermath of the campaign was a grim one. While the Mongol forces were defeated, the cost was high. Thousands of lives were lost, and the people, who had once viewed the rebellion as a movement for justice, began to question the emperor's methods. The purges within the court continued, and Empress Ma found herself increasingly isolated. Her influence over the emperor was waning, as Zhu Yuanzhang became more entrapped in his desire for vengeance and control. Li Xiaochun, emboldened by his victory, pressed for even greater power. He began to push for reforms that would grant him more autonomy in military affairs, challenging the emperor's authority in ways that made even Empress Ma nervous. Her greatest fear, that Zhu Yuanzhang's reign would descend into tyranny, was beginning to take shape before her eyes. Yet, despite her concerns, she remained steadfast in her loyalty to her husband. She had always believed that their love and their shared vision could overcome any obstacle. But the deeper she delved into the political machinations of the court, the more she realized that their bond was not as unbreakable as she had once believed. during this tumultuous period, Empress Ma began to take more direct control over the court. She realized that if she was to protect her husband's legacy and the future of their dynasty, she would have to act decisively. The key to her strategy lay in her understanding of the court's divisions. She knew that she had to gain the loyalty of those who still remained loyal to the emperor, even as they began to question his leadership. She also understood that she could no longer trust Li Xiaochun, whose growing influence was a direct threat to her own. In the months that followed, Empress Ma worked tirelessly to strengthen her own network of allies within the court. She used her intelligence and strategic foresight to outmaneuver Li Xiaochun, although she did so without ever openly challenging him. She knew that a direct confrontation would be too risky, but she also understood that if she were to ensure the stability of the empire, she would have to neutralize Li's influence. One of the most significant events in this phase of Empress Ma's life occurred when Zhu Yuanzhang, in a rare moment of vulnerability, confided in her about his growing doubts. The emperor, now fully aware of the dangers lurking within his own court, questioned the path he had chosen. His reign, once marked by hope and ambition, had become increasingly defined by violence and suspicion. The toll of the years, both in war and in politics, had begun to weigh heavily on him. Empress Ma, ever the diplomat, responded not with criticism but with understanding. She knew that her husband was a man of strength, but she also recognized the toll that leadership had taken on him. "We have built this empire together," she said softly, "but we must remember that our greatest strength lies not in the throne, but in the people we serve." Zhu Yuanzhang, for the first time in years, seemed to consider her words. It was a rare moment of clarity, and Empress Ma knew that the battle for power within the court was far from over. She had already sacrificed so much to ensure the survival of the dynasty, but as she looked ahead, she knew that the true test of her strength and of the emperors would be whether they could balance their desire for power with the need for peace. As the years passed, Empress Ma's influence continued to grow, but so did the challenges she faced. The threat from Li Xiaochun remained, and with it, the constant struggle to maintain control over the emperor. But Ma Shi had become more than just a queen. She was the heart of the empire, a woman whose intellect, strategy, and unwavering loyalty to her family and her people would determine the future of the Ming Dynasty. As the years wore on, Empress Ma found herself entrenched in the politics of the court, a place where power was a fragile thing, easily won but even more easily lost. Despite her deep love and respect for Zhu Yuanzhang, she could no longer ignore the fact that the empire they had built was beginning to unravel. The weight of leadership had taken its toll on her husband, and the political landscape was no longer the one she had once known. Zhu Yuanzhang's health had begun to decline, a slow and insidious process that threatened to bring the reign of the Ming Dynasty to an untimely end. His mind, once sharp and unwavering, was clouded with doubt, and his once indomitable will was now a shadow of its former self. He had ruled with a mix of brilliance and cruelty, but the years of warfare, betrayal, and political intrigue had left him emotionally and physically drained. It was during this time that Empress Ma's role shifted once again. She had always been a powerful figure behind the scenes, but now she found herself at the forefront of the empire's most crucial decisions. The emperor's health was deteriorating, and the specter of succession loomed large over the court. There were whispers of potential heirs, rival factions jockeying for position, and dangerous alliances being formed. In the midst of this, Empress Ma remained the one constant, the only figure who seemed capable of holding the empire together. But even Empress Ma's formidable will was not enough to prevent the storm that was brewing within the imperial court. Li Xiaochun, having grown more powerful with each passing year, had become a direct threat to the throne. His influence was no longer confined to the military, it extended into the political sphere, and his ambitions had become clear. He no longer sought merely to serve the emperor but to control him. His eyes were set on the throne, and he was willing to do anything to achieve it. The tension between Empress Ma and Li Xiaochun had been building for years, but now it reached a breaking point. The emperor, in his weakening state, could no longer protect her from the machinations of those who sought to manipulate him. The balance of power within the court was shifting, and Empress Ma found herself caught in the middle of a deadly struggle for control of the empire. It was at this moment that the first real crisis of Empress Ma's reign as the de facto ruler of the empire occurred. A series of assassinations within the court sent shockwaves through the imperial family. Several of Zhu Yuanzhang's most trusted generals, all of whom had been loyal to him in the early years of his rule, were found dead under mysterious circumstances. The emperor, who had once been able to strike fear into the hearts of his enemies, was now unable to control even his own household. The court had become a place of treachery, and Empress Ma, once again, found herself forced to act. As the assassinations continued, it became clear that someone within the court was trying to destabilize the empire. The deaths were not random. They were carefully orchestrated, each one a move in a larger game of power. Empress Ma, understanding the gravity of the situation, began to take more direct control of the court's affairs. She ordered investigations into the murders and began to isolate those she suspected of being involved. But the deeper she dug, the more complicated the situation became. It was clear that Li Xiaochun was at the heart of it all. Li had always been a master of manipulation, and now his influence over the emperor had reached its peak. He had gained the trust of Zhu Yuanzhang, who, in his frail condition, was increasingly relying on him for counsel. Li had positioned himself as the emperor's closest confidant, and with each passing day, his grip on the court grew stronger. Empress Ma, however, was not one to back down easily. She had spent her life navigating the treacherous waters of the imperial court, and she knew that if she were to protect her family and her empire, she would have to act decisively. She began to gather her own supporters, loyal men and women who had stood by her side through the darkest days of the rebellion. She knew that she would need their support if she was to stand against Li Xiaochun's growing influence. The tension between Empress Ma and Li Xiaochun came to a head during a critical meeting in the palace. The emperor, still frail and weak, was present, but it was clear that he no longer had the strength to govern. It was during this meeting that Empress Ma, in an effort to protect the throne, made a bold move. She publicly confronted Li Xiaochun, accusing him of plotting against the throne and the dynasty. Li, ever the master of political games, denied the accusations, but the seeds of doubt had been planted. The emperor, though weakened, had enough presence of mind to see the growing rift between his two closest allies. He could no longer ignore the fact that his empire was on the brink of collapse, torn apart by infighting and betrayal. But as much as Empress Ma wanted to remove Li Xiaochun from power, she knew that doing so would not be without consequences. The general's power extended far beyond the court, and removing him would not only jeopardize her own position but would also lead to widespread unrest among the military. It was a dangerous gamble, one that could result in civil war if not handled carefully. Empress Ma's next move was a carefully calculated one. She used her influence over the emperor to force a political alliance with some of the key military leaders, men who still owed their loyalty to Zhu Yuanzhang but were disillusioned with the current state of the court. She promised them that, under her guidance, the dynasty would be restored to its former glory. She knew that, if she could win their support, she could neutralize Li Xiaochun's power and secure her family's future. The next few months were marked by political intrigue and subtle manipulation. Empress Ma used her position to quietly eliminate her enemies, removing those who posed a direct threat to her authority. She forged alliances with the military leaders who had grown disillusioned with Li Xiaochun's growing power and convinced them that the only way to protect the dynasty was to back her claim to power. But Li Xiaochun was not so easily defeated. He began to rally his own supporters, using the military to intimidate those who had turned against him. The court became a battleground, with Empress Ma and Li Xiaochun each vying for control of the emperor's favor and the future of the dynasty. In a final, dramatic confrontation, Empress Ma and Li Xiaochun faced off in a tense meeting. The emperor, now completely incapacitated, could no longer intervene. The fate of the dynasty hung in the balance. Empress Ma, using all of her political acumen, managed to turn the tide in her favor. She secured the loyalty of the emperor's remaining generals and, in a bold move, ordered Li Xiaochun's arrest. Li, realizing that he had lost, fled the palace, his ambitions shattered. But even in defeat, he left behind a legacy of division and mistrust that would haunt the dynasty for years to come. Empress Ma, though victorious, was left to pick up the pieces of a fractured court. The emperor's health continued to decline, and the shadow of his death loomed large over the empire. As Empress Ma stood at the edge of the throne, she knew that the battle for the future of the Ming Dynasty was far from over. The challenges she had faced were only the beginning, but for now, she had won the most crucial battle, the fight for the future of her family and her empire. The true test, however, would come when the emperor's reign finally came to an end, and Empress Ma would have to face the greatest challenge of all: securing the future of the dynasty without her husband by her side. The year was drawing to a close, and Empress Ma found herself standing on the precipice of an uncertain future. The Ming Dynasty, the empire her husband had built from nothing, was now her responsibility alone. Zhu Yuanzhang's death had left an indelible mark on her soul, and the weight of the crown rested heavily on her shoulders. As the emperor's health deteriorated further, the court found itself in a state of fragile equilibrium, a house of cards that could collapse at any moment. The death of Zhu Yuanzhang was not just the end of an era, but the beginning of a tumultuous struggle for power, one that would test Empress Ma's resolve like never before. Empress Ma had always known the dangers that came with power, and after Zhu Yuanzhang's death, the political vacuum was more perilous than ever. In the months leading up to his passing, she had done everything she could to protect the dynasty from within. She had navigated the treacherous waters of court politics, eliminated her enemies, and secured her family's position. But now she faced the ultimate challenge: keeping the empire intact without her husband at the helm. The emperor had always been the symbol of unity for the Ming Dynasty, and with his death, Empress Ma feared that the fragile alliance between the court, the military, and the people would disintegrate. His death was not just a personal loss for her, but a political crisis. The empire was vast, with many factions vying for power, and now that the emperor was gone, these factions would seek to assert their dominance. Empress Ma knew that she had only one chance to stabilize the empire. She had to ensure the smooth transition of power to the next generation. The question, however, was who would that be? Zhu Yuanzhang had never clearly designated a successor, and the succession was clouded by a series of competing claims and rivalries. The position of emperor was not just about bloodline. It was about strength, strategy, and alliances. She had to act quickly, or the empire would tear itself apart. The first step was to secure the loyalty of the military. Empress Ma knew that without the support of the generals, any move she made would be in vain. She called a council of war, gathering the top military leaders who had fought alongside Zhu Yuanzhang in the early days of the rebellion. She knew them well. They were the men who had helped build the empire, but they were also the men who had seen the emperor at his weakest. They had witnessed the frailty of the old lion, and many had begun to question the wisdom of continuing the dynasty under his sons. At the council, Empress Ma presented her vision for the future. She argued that the Ming Dynasty needed a strong leader to survive, one who could bring stability and continue the work of Zhu Yuanzhang. The question was, who could fill that role? The emperor's sons, though capable in their own right, lacked the political acumen to command the respect of the court and the military. It was clear that Empress Ma could not place her trust in them alone. As she had done before, Empress Ma used her sharp intellect and her understanding of the court's inner workings to turn the situation in her favor. She began to build a coalition of powerful allies who would support her decisions. She knew that if she could win the support of the military and key officials, She would be able to guide the dynasty through the storm. But even as she worked to stabilize the court, Empress Ma faced opposition from within her own family. Zhu Yuanzhang's sons, particularly the crown prince, were eager to assume the throne. They had spent their entire lives preparing for this moment. But none of them possessed the strength or political savvy needed to unite the empire. The crown prince was weak, indecisive, and easily manipulated. Empress Ma knew that if he were allowed to ascend the throne, it would only be a matter of time before the empire would collapse under the weight of its internal divisions. It was then that Empress Ma made a bold decision. She would take matters into her own hands. She gathered a small group of loyal supporters, including military leaders and high-ranking officials, and orchestrated a political coup. She removed the crown prince from the line of succession and placed her own chosen heir on the throne. It was a risky move, one that would certainly provoke opposition, but it was the only way to ensure the survival of the dynasty. The coup was swift and decisive. The crown prince was exiled, and Empress Ma's chosen heir, a young and capable leader, was crowned emperor. With this move, Empress Ma secured the future of the dynasty. But the cost was high. The court was in chaos, and there were factions within the military who did not accept her decision. The struggle for power had reached its peak, and Empress Ma knew that her greatest test was yet to come. As the new emperor settled into his role, Empress Ma assumed the role of regent, guiding the young ruler with a firm hand. She was the true power behind the throne, the one who made the decisions that would shape the future of the Ming Dynasty. But she was not blind to the dangers that lay ahead. Her decision to place her own chosen heir on the throne had alienated many, and she knew that it was only a matter of time before the other factions would begin to move against her. The empire was not at peace. Civil war loomed on the horizon, and Empress Ma faced threats from both within and without. The military, once loyal to Zhu Yuanzhang, was now divided, with some generals pledging their allegiance to the new emperor, while others refused to accept the change. The political factions within the court were at odds, each one seeking to gain control of the throne. Empress Ma's reign as regent was marked by a series of brutal power struggles, with her rivals constantly plotting against her. The young emperor, though intelligent and capable, was no match for the complexities of court politics, and Empress Ma had to act swiftly and decisively to protect him. She used her influence to outmaneuver her enemies, playing the game of politics with the skill of a seasoned veteran. But as the years passed, Empress Ma's power began to wane. The challenges she faced were immense, and the toll of the constant political battles began to wear on her. She had given everything to protect the dynasty and ensure its survival. But now it seemed that the cost of power had become too great. In the end, Empress Ma's legacy was a complicated one. She had preserved the Ming Dynasty for a time, but the seeds of division that had been planted during her reign would continue to haunt the empire for generations. The power struggles, the betrayals, and the sacrifices she had made would be remembered, but the stability she had fought for would prove to be fleeting. When Empress Ma passed away, the court mourned the loss of one of the greatest rulers in Chinese history. Her legacy was cemented, but the empire she had worked so hard to protect was in decline. The young emperor, though capable, was unable to hold the empire together. The Ming Dynasty would survive for a time, but the fractures within the empire were too deep to heal. Empress Ma's story was one of power, sacrifice, and resilience. She had fought for the survival of her family and her empire, and though her reign ended in turmoil, her contributions would be remembered by future generations. Her name would go down in history as one of the greatest women to ever rule China, a symbol of strength and determination in a world dominated by men. And while the Ming Dynasty eventually fell, Empress Ma's legacy would endure, a testament to her indomitable will and unwavering devotion to the throne.